Okay, colleagues, we do have a quorum. So I am going to call this meeting of the Committee of Adjustment for Tuesday, June 22nd order. And I would like to let members of the public, staff, presenters, and members of the committee be advised that the meetings are broadcast and recorded and made available on the internet. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest in the general nature thereof? I see none. We have no deputations tonight, so we'll move right into our minor variances reports. And so, Rob, do you want to announce the purpose of the meeting, and then we'll do the first item, which is 3321.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
That's nice. We have to do something for her.
Yeah. Somebody's got an open mic. If I could ask them to mute, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I can announce that the Committee of Adjustment is holding a public hearing in accordance with Section 45 of the Planning Act, as amended, in order to consider two applications for relief from Bylaw 2009-21, being the comprehensive zoning bylaw for the Township of Selwyn. The prescribed notices of public meeting were provided by prepaid first-class mail to all residents within 60-meter radius of the subject properties. Ministries and agencies were circulated via email. The subject properties were posted with a sign advertising the public hearings. The notices were also available on the Township's website. The notice circulation complies with the requirements of the Planning Act. In order to be notified of the decision of the Township of Selwyn on the minor variance application, a written request must be made to the Township. As you noted, Mr. Chair, the first application before the committee this evening is application A3321. It was provided to us by Scott Pluis, and it relates to the address 2566 Fire Route 37 in the Smith Ward. Mr. Chair, the applicant's applying to vary from three aspects of the township's zoning bylaw. Firstly, to increase the maximum lot coverage of accessory structures from 5% to 7.5%. Secondly, to decrease the minimum front yard setback from 7.5 meters to 6.09 meters. And thirdly, to increase the maximum height of accessory structures from 4 meters to 4.64 meters. This is in an effort to allow for the construction of a 600 square foot, one-story garage in the front yard of the subject property. So what's contributing to the need for these variances, Mr. Chair, is the size of the building is reasonably small because it's constrained by the size of the actual lot itself. So that contributes to the need for a height increase to allow for some storage above the main floor. In addition, when it comes to the setback from the road allowance, Mr. Chair, the property is fairly shallow. And so in order to meet the setback from the high water mark, it needs to be pushed closer towards the road. So those are contributing factors to the need. I've provided committee with a summary of my thoughts as they relate to compliance with the four tests of the Planning Act. So in essence, it's my opinion that the general intent of the official plan is being maintained, the general intent of the zoning bylaw is being maintained. The proposal is desirable for the development and use of the land, building or structure, and in addition, the proposal is minor in nature. I note, Mr. Chair, that I've recommended a number of conditions that are consistent with the input that we would typically receive from our commenting agencies. And we're still actually waiting on some input, but I'm confident that the recommendations that I've made will cover off what our agencies, commenting agencies, would typically request as conditions. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Rob. First, I'm going to go out to our audience, and I believe Scott Lewis is on the line. Scott, did you want to add anything to what Rob has said?
No, thank you. That sounds pretty detailed, and I just appreciate him taking the time to go through our variance application.
Okay, thank you. Tanya, I do not think we have anybody else on the line to speak to this application. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so then I will go to council. Anybody on council? I see Anita's hands up.
This is just with regards to the archaeological assessment that Rob lists under the public comments. Has the applicant been in touch with the company that does the assessment?
Rob?
Yeah, I'm not sure, Mr. Chair. We would have advised Mr. Poulos of the fact that that wasn't a requirement of the ministry. I'm not sure if he's taken the time yet to reach out to any archaeologists.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, and I should have said from the committee, not from council. So, okay, we're working on consent, so we'll come back to vote on this one afterwards. And Rob, could you go to our second file, 83621?
Yes, of course, Mr. Chair. So the application 83621 was provided to us by Jacob O'Neill, and it relates to the property at 1163 Connaught Drive in Ennismore Ward. The request is being made to increase the maximum lot coverage of accessory structures from 5% to 8.5% in order to allow for the construction of a 720 square foot, one-story detached garage on the property. Again, I note in this context, Mr. Chair, that the property is relatively small by today's standard. In addition, there is an existing boathouse and a deck, each of which are contributing to the existing lot coverage for accessory buildings. These are in the rear yard, and what's being proposed is in the front yard. So cumulatively, Mr. Chair, I believe that the intent of the official planning zoning bylaw, which is to focus construction on the main structure as opposed to accessory structures, is being maintained. In addition, it's my opinion, as noted in my report, that the proposal is appropriate for the development and use of land, buildings, and structures, and is minor in nature given the context. And again, Mr. Chair, I've noted a series of conditions that the applicant has been made aware of, and are consistent with what we would typically hear from our commenting agencies. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Very much, Rob. First, I'll go to the audience, and I understand that Paul Wellman, who is a neighbor, is on the line and would like to talk in support of this application. Mr. Wellman, are you there?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I sure can. Go ahead.
Perfect. Yes, I live 2 doors down at 1159 Connaught Drive. I am in support of the approval for the variance. As previously noted, this lot is fairly small. If you go farther south along this street, you find that the properties are the same, roughly the same width, about 100 feet wide, but they get deeper as you go south and they get shorter as you go north, just as a road follows along the shoreline. So if you had been farther south, then you wouldn't run into this problem. So I don't think it's fair that he wouldn't be prevented from having a building there when somebody farther south, just because they have a longer lot, and have a building like he's trying to put here. So I'm just prepared to and happy to support the application. I think it should be approved.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Wellman. I believe, Tanya, that we have nobody else on the line to speak either for or against this application.
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so I'll go to council. Is there any questions? Or to committee, is there any questions? Anita?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is just for Rob. Under your conclusion paragraph, the last line, you say that approve the request for a minor variance, but deny the request, the setback reduction for the boathouse. Did you speak to that in the report?
I'm sorry, that's clearly a throwback to an earlier decision or an earlier report. Councillor Locke, I apologize for that. There should be no reference to that. The only thing that's being applied for in this context is the lot coverage, and it relates only to the garage in the front yard. no boathouse application.
Okay, thank you.
There's a rogue comment in there. Okay, anybody else have a question? I do not see anything from the committee. So not hearing anything, and those are the two items. I would entertain a motion to approve the consent reports from Donna, seconded by Jerry. All those in favor, please put up your hands. Consent agenda is carried. Thank you, everybody. We have no deferred matters. We have no correspondence. We have no information, but we do have the minutes from May 25th. Anybody want to move those minutes from Anita, seconded by Donna? All those in favor? Okay, that's carried. Our next meeting is July the 13th, 2021, and I will entertain a motion to adjourn by Jerry, seconded by Anita. All in favor? That's carried. Colleagues, we will reassemble as council in 19 minutes, and we will begin our meeting at 6 o'clock. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you shortly. Bye-bye.
Okay, council, we're all set on YouTube.
Thank you very much. I am going to call this regular council meeting to order for June the 22nd, 2021. I'm going to begin with our land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that we are on the treaty and traditional territory of the Mississauga and Anishinaabe. We offer our gratitude to the First Peoples for their care for and teachings about our earth and our relations. May we honor those teachings. We will then now ask for a moment of silent reflection so the council staff and members of the public can quietly reflect on our duty to the community we are trying to serve. Thank you. Members of the public, staff, presenters, and members of council, please be advised that meetings are broadcast and recorded and made available on the internet. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? I see Anita has her hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Correspondence item 6A3 with regards to Aon's request for an extension. I'm declaring on that as I work for one of the Aon facilities.
Thank you, Anita. We will then move on to the minutes. We have 3 sets of minutes. June the 8th, the regular council meeting of June the 8th, closed session of June the 8th, and the special meeting of June the 15th. We have a motion for those from Donna, seconded by Anita. All those in favor? Those are carried. Under discussion out of the minutes, I do have something that I'm going to say, so colleagues could just bear with me for a minute. This relates to the minutes of June the 15th. So colleagues, I wanted to take a minute to comment on the June 15th special meeting, and I'm going to take the opportunity of considering the minutes to do so. Council has worked hard to engage community members on the issue of Hague Point. Over 1,000 local residents and other interested parties have been involved through the survey responses, hundreds of emails to council, dozens of interventions at council through formal presentations and through the question period, and of course, through the engagement with our consultant. There have been a wide range of views expressed. I believe it will be important that in moving forward, we seek solutions that unite us and avoid ideas which polarize the community into different factions. I truly believe that everyone's opinion is important and that the measure of that importance is not contingent on the amount of taxes one pays, what ward they come from, whether they are a year-round or seasonal resident, whether they are wealthy or of modest means. Folks, everyone and every opinion is important. I also believe everyone is entitled to express their opinion, including ones I may disagree with. Everyone has the right to express themselves to council, and as I have said previously, to do so respectfully and to be treated with respect. What people are not entitled to is their own set of facts. I appreciate that mistakes are often inadvertent, that no one likes to be corrected, and that being in front of council can be an intimidating experience. Nevertheless, when a delegate suggests something as a fact, when it is not, councillors will likely raise the point and seek clarification. I realize that for members of council, this is part of the back and forth of debate. It's how the system is designed to work. I also appreciate that many presenters may not be comfortable or as comfortable in the public arena. And I will take a more active role in the chair to have folks separate to separate opinion from fact, and to ensure it is done in as non-controversial, confrontational manner as possible. Yet at the same time, allow apparent inaccurate statements to be discussed. Folks, it is time to focus on solutions, to build partnerships, and to see ourselves as neighbors, not adversaries. Thank you. So the minutes, we will go on to our deputations, and our first deputation is from Chris, who is back with us again. Good to see you, Chris. And today you're going to be talking about the community safety and well-being interim plan.
Thank you, Mayor Mitchell and members of council for having me back again this month. I'm just going to share my screen. Can you see that okay? Perfect, thank you. So the purpose of my follow-up delegation in connection with the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan is to have the interim report in front of you for your consideration. As I mentioned last month, all municipalities in the province under the Police Services Act are required to adopt the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. The province originally had a deadline of January 1st of this year and extended it to July 1st of this year. Ministry of Solicitor General had an announcement today, but I was hoping it had something to do with Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan, but it didn't. We are proposing this interim report as a measure to show the province that we are actively engaged with a strategy to work on the plan. However, we certainly are missing the July 1st deadline to have a full plan and have it completed. The plan, the interim report in front of you is certainly a high level plan, as you have likely surmised, which was on purpose with our goal. And this is different from what I presented last month, is to have a full plan for spring of 2022. Through feedback from our advisory committee and through review by senior administration at the city, as it's going through, it went through general committee and going to council at the end of the month, thought spring 2022 would be more realistic for this plan. As I mentioned last month, just worth repeating as a reminder that community safety and well-being planning involves taking an integrated approach to service delivery by working across a wide range of sectors, agencies, and organizations to proactively develop and implement evidence-based strategies and programs to address local priorities related to crime and complex social issues on a sustainable basis. We'll be looking at various risk factors related to discrimination, crime, victimization, and other social risk factors that are influencing the city and the county. The advisory committee will prioritize those risk factors to present to all local councils as their recommendation for what will be focused on and the strategies that will be developed to address those risk factors, looking at new and innovative ways of collaborating together across sectors to implement those activities, because the purpose isn't to just identify things that we're doing now, but to build on what we're doing now and work across sectors to address those risk factors that will be set out, and certainly identifying measurable outcomes for those strategies. As I showed last month, these are the levels of intervention that we will build into the design of the program, or the plan around social development, prevention, risk intervention, and emergency response. The approach we're taking is very similar to what I've already said, but with a few more details that I'll add. So we have formed our advisory committee. Certainly data is going to drive a lot of how this goes forward. We'll be aligning with various plans and local assets, whether those assets are existing committees or situation tables or committees in the township that relate to community safety and well-being, whether they be police service board or other committees that you have established or in other townships. Certainly Statistics Canada data and other relevant crime data and other sources of data, as we are members of the data consortium locally. certainly the expertise from the local advisory committee members. Community consultation will be critical. How that moves forward, whether we're able to do things in person, such as public meetings or open houses or roundtables, will be determined at the time. I'm projecting at this point that it'll be late summer, early fall that will take place. We have a lot of options available. We'll be using the city's Connect Peterborough website and may look at other platforms as well that the county or township may wish to use. We'll be expecting the township to use its mechanisms as well, whether it be your website, social media, newsletters, tax bills, whatever you use right now, relying on Leslie Newton, your rep on the advisory committee, to convey information through Selwyn to the advisory committee. And as I mentioned, certainly identifying risk factors, developing strategies, and creating measurable outcomes. As I mentioned last month, we're building on, for this interim report, the key themes that came out of the community well-being plan. I'm not going to go into detail. You have the interim plan in front of you. The items and issues for consideration and research that have been identified in the interim report under each of these headings were directly obtained from input from the advisory committee members and from the community well-being plan that was completed a couple of years ago. It's not the expectation that all those issues will be addressed. As I mentioned earlier, it'll be up to the advisory committee to prioritize various risk factors so that we're able to tackle things and look across organizations and agencies and municipalities to address the challenges that are identified. So to say that these 7 will be the end result, it won't be the case. We will whittle it down. We're casting the net wide with this interim report, and we'll be looking at the data, consultation information to build that final report. Happy to answer any questions that council may have about the interim report. I will say that I do have a sample resolution for council to consider if they wish to use that or something different, but I will certainly answer any questions that you may have. I'll stop sharing so that you can see various council members. They have their hand up.
Thank you, Chris. Questions of Chris? Anita?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chris, for your presentation. So it looks like, so the city of Peterborough obviously is one of, I guess, the largest partner in this particular project, and their issues with their opioid crisis and their homelessness, their a lot of the challenges that are, you know, more Peterborough city related as opposed to the townships. Do you see that that's going to be a challenge in terms of making sure that the whole report, when it's done, is actually going to really be able to seriously touch upon the different types of issues that say would be in the townships as opposed to the city of Peterborough?
Through you, Mayor Mitchell, it's critical that the rural challenges are reflected in the plan. Every municipality needs a plan, and Selwyn needs its issues identified. As I mentioned, though, the all those items that are in the interim report, I was at OSM Council last night, and they counted them, and there was about 134 points in there. There is no way that all of those are going to make it into the plan. I've read many of the plans from other municipalities, and it ranges really from 3 to 5 key themes that are identified, and then say 2 to 5 actions within each of those areas that make it into the community safety and well-being plan. So I need to rely on the input from township representatives, from the consultation work that is done and in the townships, and that as the process moves along, that not all city issues are going to be in there. Not all county and township issues are going to be in there. We have to look at it, as I mentioned, that say everybody identifies mental health issues for youth as a key priority that we have to move forward on. It's not good enough that we look at CMHA's strategic plan and just try to implement that. We have to build on that and see what the city, municipalities, other organizations can do to move the yardstick on those issues. Otherwise, we're just regurgitating what we already know. So it'll be important that specific rural issues are identified. And I'll use OSM as another example. They brought up the human trafficking issue. And they said it's an issue in their township, whether what's going on Highway 7 or whether it be in other areas of their township. They know it's an issue there. We know it's an issue in the city, whether it's an issue in Selwyn or North Kawartha or Havelock, Belmont, Wissune. We'll have to let the data reveal that and the voice of the townships reflect what those priorities are. So it's that's the approach we're taking. So we know there'll be common ground on a number of issues. How we identify those separate issues, whether we create an appendix, and this is just designed more so as we move forward, that there may be 8 appendices for each township if there are minor things that are going on, like you could talk about ATV safety or all-terrain vehicle in winter and summer or all year round as a key factor that's been coming out. It's not an issue for the city, but it's certainly a rural issue that the OPP have identified. And certainly me going to council meetings has come up. Even before I get to my presentation, they're talking about it and see it on the agenda. So it's going to be a process, and I'm making a commitment that there'll be rural issues identified in the plan.
Thank you. Donna?
Yes, through you. Thank you so much, Chris, for coming again. This is going to be a lot of work and appreciate your commitment. I don't have any questions, and I'd be prepared that we move the motion that you outlined earlier.
Maybe if it's possible, just to throw that motion up on the screen.
Sure, I can do that.
There we go. So whereas municipalities are required under the Police Service Act 1990 to adopt a community safety and well-being plan, whereas all local municipalities in the city and county of Peterborough are working with a multi-sectoral advisory committee to develop a community safety and well-being plan, therefore be resolved that the interim report of the community safety and well-being plan be endorsed with the goal of completing a full plan in spring 2022. That's moved by Donna. Do we have a seconder? Nita has seconded. Just before I call the vote, Chris, if I could ask you, do you have some sort of indication from the province that they're going to be comfortable with this?
They have not given that indication. A number of townships, along with the city and the county, sent letters to the Ministry of Solicitor General requesting an extension, along with quite a number of other Ontario municipalities. Cavan Monaghan did get a reply. They didn't indicate any extension. They voiced the expectation that municipalities will meet their legislative requirements, but understand the challenges that they're facing at this point in time and are willing to work with municipalities to get them completed. There were no penalties or punitive actions that they identified, and that's why I was hoping that, you know, the announcement from the Solicitor General and the OPP was about this plan today, but it was about mental health services at the OPP dispatch. Anyways, there is no indication at this point in time, and through the OMSA network that I'm on, both AMO and OMSA have not received any indication either through their advocacy work that the ministry is going to penalize municipalities. And as I mentioned, one of the points of the interim report is to show that we do have a strategy to move forward and that we're not starting from scratch necessarily, but sorry, that's the long answer to say, no, I don't know what the ministry is expecting.
It's a good answer. The reality is it's not through lack of interest or lack caring or lack of effort. It's simply that the last 60 months have preoccupied us with a pandemic. And I think it would be fair to say that everybody is looking forward to coming together and working on this and putting the plan together. It's not a matter of disinterest, it's simply a matter of timing. And I know through yourself and all of the partners, there's a genuine commitment to get this done. So if nobody else has any other questions, I will call the vote. All those in favor? That is passed. Thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now go on to our second presentation. I think Debbie Jenkins has a presentation for us. Debbie is on the line. There you are. Hi, Debbie.
Hi.
So whenever you're ready, I'll start the clock. We normally provide about 10 minutes. At about 9 minutes, I'll make a note, and at 10, I'll ask you to wrap up. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mayor Mitchell and Council. So my name is Debbie Jenkins, and I'm here today presenting on behalf of Imagine the Marsh, second generation. And the thesis of my talk today is linking nature to parks and recreation in Selwyn. So let me start by acknowledging that today we live in a world that we have never seen before, with a pandemic, biodiversity crisis, climate change, and global tipping points that some scientists suggest we've already surpassed. To have a healthy community requires us to look at our activities through these lenses and to address these issues and think long-term. Notably, parks and recreation are important in this context for our mental health and our physical health, but also for the conservation and long-term health of our natural environment. And this aspect, the natural environment, is a major gap in the current service delivery review for parks and recreation. So we know that parks are important. Today in Canada, we've committed to protecting 30% of our land and our fresh water by 2030. Importantly, this is to buffer against climate change and to reverse the global scale declines in biodiversity. At a provincial level, Ontario is doing poorly, with only 10% protection. And in Peterborough County, we have less than 1% of our land and fresh water in protection today. Now, Selwyn Township is the same. The report indicates that just 87 hectares have been identified as parkland, which is less than 1%. So this review provides the opportunity to address these shortfalls and to make some critical links between nature and our parks. Peg Point and the area has been identified as a particularly important area of this community. It is a sliver of land that is the meeting place of the Otonabee River, Kachewanuka Lake, and the Lakefield Marsh provincially significant wetland. These diverse ecosystems provide critical habitat for countless animals and plants and are increasingly under human pressure. From a recreational perspective, they include things like boating and fishing, swimming, paddleboarding, docking, camping, biking, hiking, hunting, and bird watching, just to name a few. But the area also supports a trailer park, campground, residential and commercial developments, a marina, and it's the source of our drinking water. Many of these activities are increasing. And last fall, we saw the expansion of the trailer portion of the campground expanded with additional infrastructure and services into natural areas of our park. What we haven't seen is efforts to protect the natural environment, which is the common thread, I think, that brings residents and non-residents to this beautiful area. The service review for parks and recreation provides the opportunity to fix this, and science provides the framework. Decades of research advance meaningful protection measures and can reduce environmental degradation, support biodiversity, and sustain the many ecological services that nature provides our community. Services like water filtration, wildlife habitat, erosion control, carbon sequestering, pollinators, oxygen production, and of course, our fresh drinking water. Of particular importance is the Lakefield Marsh on the west side of Hague Point and proximal to the campground and trailer park, and its upgradient of our drinking water intake. The marsh is provincially significant, identified through a scientific process of ranking. And for context, we know that 40% of species live and breed in wetlands, and in Lakefield, this includes many species at risk. We also know that wetlands are disappearing 3 times faster than forests, and in Southern Ontario, including here, 72% of wetlands have been lost on average, while the loss, degradation, and exploitation of wetlands continues. Here in Lakefield, these are concerns that relate directly to parks and recreation. Specifically, documents report that the trailer park, campground, dock extensions, powerboats, jet skis, and other human activities in the wetland and on the point have negatively impacted wetland function, disrupt nesting waterfowl and turtles, increase fishing pressure, degrade, replace, and disturb both critical aquatic and terrestrial habitat. We have known for decades that this area is sensitive, and given its irreplaceable ecological values, Imagine the Marsh is asking that the natural value of Hague Point and the marsh be recognized and protected by the township and Parks and Recreation Department, making the critical link between nature and our parks. This could be achieved through improvements to park zoning to recognize the conservation of natural areas and their ecological values. Secondly, we're requesting that a natural buffer be restored and protected along the sides of the wetland to support the long-term integrity of that ecosystem and its inhabitants. So a 120-meter buffer is a good starting place, and it would help support many species that use both the land and the water to nest and raise their young, etc. Notably, the current buffer is less than 15 meters, and it's often interrupted by human activity, including a boat launch and docks that infiltrate into the wetland. Formal recognition and management of a buffer is critical. Thirdly, we'd ask that high-density human activities and infrastructure on the point and the wetland be reduced and managed, a balance between human activity and sound protection. This could include reducing the number of trailer sites and promoting low-impact activities and camping instead, reducing and eliminating docks in the wetland. This is particularly important as the municipality reminds us often that Hague Point and the marsh are in the source water protection zone. It is a serious oversight that the docking facilities on Hague Point are absent from both the service delivery report and the operation contract for the campground and trailer park. So finally, it's 2021. Over 30 years since the negative impacts of human infrastructure and activity in the marshland and on Hague Point have been documented. Through the service review process, Council has the opportunity to align human activity and the protection of biodiversity, the wetland ecosystem, and the ecological services that are critical to our community. Start by expanding and restoring the terrestrial buffer and use the Marshland Center to educate people about the importance of the area and how to respect it. Selwyn could be a model for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for respecting the timeline. Thank you. And so I'll turn it over to Council. Do we have any questions? Donna, sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Donna.
Yes, through you to Debbie. I don't have a question, but I just wanted to thank you for your presentation and how thorough and scientific and well put together it was. And you're very well spoken and delivered your message very well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. Okay, I will take a motion then to receive that report from Jerry, seconded by Anita. All those in favor? Carrie, thank you, Debbie.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Okay, colleagues, we'll move on to question period. Madam Clerk, do we have any questions registered?
No questions.
Okay, thank you. We will move on to our municipal officers and staff reports. And the first one is from Rob, and this is our cannabis zoning bylaw suggested amendment. So Rob, do you want to take a few minutes to run through this?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So yeah, this is kind of the next step in the process that we've undertaken to review our cannabis zoning bylaw regulations. The report provides council with a bit of a summary of how we've gotten to today. Most recently, council met on the 13th and resolved three things, essentially. That we engage Meridian Planning to complete cannabis cultivation bylaw amendments, that Meridian Planning provide a professional opinion outlining the maximum defendable setback recommendations as relates to setbacks from sensitive land uses, and that we obtain a legal opinion as it relates to our authority to regulate medical cannabis operations. So the purpose of the report is to to provide council with a summary of where we are following those recommendations. So we did indeed engage Meridian to complete a draft zoning bylaw amendment, and I'll kind of summarize what the implications are to their recommendations following, or as a function of my review of the report. In addition, we did receive from them their opinion as it relates to the maximum defendable setback, which the memo has been attached to this report for council's information. They have concluded that essentially, as it relates to the setback of cannabis crops from sensitive land uses, they could defend a 300-meter setback. So very quickly, to summarize the implications of the proposed amendment, Mr. Chair, the zoning bylaw would amend 4 different sections of our larger zoning bylaw. It would provide for some additional definitions and some modifications of some definitions. It would add to our general provisions and also modify certain regulations in both the agricultural and rural zones. I've kind of summarized in my report exactly what the intent of the amendment would be. So essentially, we would redefine cannabis cultivation indoor and outdoor to reference the Federal Cannabis Act licensing provisions. We would revise the definitions of agriculture and agricultural produce warehouse, add some definitions related to air treatment control, adverse effects, sensitive land use. One of the issues that the council wanted to ensure was covered in the bylaw was we would regulate in a way that spoke to the 2 conditions that we would be faced when considering cannabis cultivation, both indoor and outdoor. So the general provisions have been set up in such a way as to create regulations that apply to all cannabis uses, and beyond that, regulations that are specific to outdoor cannabis cultivation and indoor cannabis cultivation. So I've summarized what's been provided for in that general provision. So I can go over those briefly, Mr. Chair. So essentially, those that apply to all uses, there will only be 1 license holder per lot. As it relates to practical matters, there are some criteria that relates to lighting. That lighting is to be directed downwards and to be dark sky compliant. We also speak to a buffer requirement between residential and community facility zones, or uses that are permitted in those zones, again to mitigate the impact of the view between those sensitive land uses and the cannabis activity. We would prohibit outdoor storage. We would ensure that accessory buildings in support of that activity would be 50 meters, would be set back 50 meters from any lot line, and would be subject to a 300 meters separation distance if there was cannabis being stored in the building or dried in the building. There would be a prohibition against the sale of cannabis, and we would not consider a zoning or minor variances for any deviations from the regulations. And again, we would ensure that there was a setback of at least 300 meters between a crop and a sensitive land use. So as it relates to cannabis indoor uses, they're only to be permitted by way of a zoning bylaw amendment. That was something that was a carryover from our previous criteria. This type of use will only be permitted in a purposely built building, so existing buildings cannot be used for cannabis cultivation. Expansions will have to be consistent with the zoning bylaw. We've created minimum lot area and setback criteria specific to micro and to typical cannabis licenses. And site-specific zoning bylaws would be required to establish minimum separation distances from land use. So we're going to allow the science to dictate how far buildings that are used to support indoor cannabis operations should be set back from sensitive land uses. So as it relates to the specific implications to the outdoor use, again, we've set up a system whereby the closest that the crop could ever be to a lot line will be 50 meters, and that distance would be increased to account for proximity to any sensitive land use. And again, we've defined what that means. Residential land uses are sensitive, and the setback to a residential use would be from the residential building. And sensitive land uses that are more land-based, like schools and parks, the setback would be from a lot line that's shared with the agricultural parcel. So in that context, the setbacks could be as high as 300 meters, as I noted earlier. In addition to that, Mr. Chair, we've made some changes we thought were necessary in both the agricultural and rural zone provisions to ensure that the intent of the bylaw, which is to ensure that these uses occur within purposely built buildings, is properly understood. Mr. Chair, in addition to those issues related to the cannabis bylaw, we also Council had also asked us to consider issues related to a nuisance odor bylaw. We were made aware of the fact that the town of Pelham had been considering the adoption of a bylaw, and they have. So that's the only example that we've been able to find, and we're currently reviewing it, speaking with the bylaw enforcement officers, et cetera, who are having to implement it, and it's our intention to report back on, to council with something more specific about our findings after we've had a chance to adequately review that. And as noted earlier, there was also a request that council made of township staff to seek a legal opinion on whether or not we have the authority to regulate personal medical cannabis operations with our solicitor. We have, and they have provided us recently with a summary of what their thoughts are. Our goal in this case, again, would be to provide council with a summary of their thoughts with a report back to council on the 13th of July. So that aligns with my recommendation here, Mr. Chair, which is to hear from council about whether or not they think that, or what their thoughts are on the proposed amendments, to incorporate any thoughts that council might have into some additional regulations or modified regulations, and to bring back the final document for council's consideration at the July 13th meeting, and with the goal being to hold the requisite public meeting to consider public input on August 10th. And it's our intention, Mr. Chair, to have the authors of the draft bylaw, Nick McDonald and Allison Luoma, at the meeting to answer any questions that council might have and or the public might have.
Thank you, Rob. So, colleagues, tonight we're simply here to discuss the bylaw and have Rob ask any questions, make any suggested changes. We're not approving anything tonight. That will come forward to the meeting on in July, and then depending on what happens there, go on to a public meeting. So, Donna, I think you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you to Rob. But to me, this is head and shoulders over our other bylaw, and you've gotten, I believe, everything in here. I hope we've gotten it right, and that we've thought of everything this time. I did have a number of questions, but I had an opportunity to speak to Rob earlier today, so most of my questions are answered. I just have 3, if I could ask 3 left that I forgot to ask this morning. Would that be okay?
Go ahead.
Okay. So Rob, you mentioned planting a buffer in certain areas. Would there be any recommendation for a buffer, one type of buffer over another, or would we just leave it as a buffer?
Well, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so the township zoning bylaw has a specific description of what the buffers to look like, right? So what we're saying is in this context, and typically the buffers that are spoken to in our bylaw apply to any commercial or industrial use that abuts a residential use. So what our bylaw says is, look, if you're developing a commercial use and it abuts a residence, you're compelled to put a buffer between your property and the property adjacent to yours. So we're applying the same logic. So we're just referencing the provisions in our existing bylaw. And so it's all prescribed there as to what that looks like.
Okay. And my next question is, I don't think any reference was made to hoop houses, but you and I have talked about that before. And I was wondering if you know if there are any regulations that we could apply to hoop houses.
Yeah, so my understanding is that hoop houses are not considered to be indoor cultivation. That the licensee, the federal government, considers the propagation or the cultivation of cannabis within a hoop house to be an outdoor cannabis cultivation activity, right? And so they are essentially, for the most part, the ones that I've seen in the township, they're just bent pieces of steel upon which you lay some plastic, and I think it extends the season, and maybe you can start the season a bit early and it extends it a bit later to give you a few more weeks of capacity to protect the plants for a little bit. But they're really, I guess, they're not really structures by definition, given their makeup. So, and if we take the guidance from the licensor, they're essentially akin to growing outdoors. They're really not intended to be considered to be an indoor propagation, right? So there's really no mechanism, I guess, to other than what we're doing. So in this context, if somebody wanted to use them to support their cannabis crop, we would apply the minimum separation distance applicable to those as though they were a crop, part of the crop, right?
Okay. And my last one, I may have asked this to you this morning, but I'm sorry I've forgotten the answer. It's section 3.49.1, only one license per lot. So does that refer to both indoor and outdoor? What do you consider a lot? I have a feeling I asked you this, and I'm sorry if I did, but I do remember the answer.
Yeah, so that's intended to ensure that that there's only one licensee, right? That's actually using the property for the purposes of cannabis cultivation. That there won't be more than one corporation or licensee operating. So how that manifests itself ultimately, what we would be concerned with is to see the license that's been issued, and if the license allows for both indoor and outdoor, then we'd have to accept that, so long as the license is issued to one individual or a corporation, and that there aren't two corporations operating on the property. That's, I think, what we're after here. So I guess to a certain degree, we'll be reliant on the language in the license, right, to establish if whether or not what's happening on the property is consistent with that provision.
Thank you very much. That's all for me.
Thank you, Donna. Anita, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question and a comment. So I'll just start with the comment that this, I want to thank Rob for this really comprehensive report. We are moving definitely in the right direction compared to when we first started this. I think we didn't really know, I think we had earlier discussed, in our mind, we were thinking it would be like grow ops on a farm property or whatever. And then all of a sudden we had an application for, or heard of an application within close proximity to a residential area. So I really like the changes that have been made to this bylaw. I think it nails down a whole lot more. It's been a really steep learning curve, I think, to come up with this. And I'm hoping that the province and the feds actually, who don't seem to have as deep of an understanding of the challenges, I kind of hope that they look to the municipalities who have been doing a large majority of the legwork, trial and error sort of thing. So I think that's a good thing. So with regards to the licensee, you were talking, and Donna was asking about one license per lot, or however that was worded. So how does that work? If does the property have to be owned by the licensee, or do they like rent the property, or how does that work? In terms of, sometimes there's obviously we know there's a criminal element involved in illegal grow ops, and I'm just, what are the safeguards that are in place, or is that something that the feds and the province sort of look after?
Yeah, so the way that the provision is worded, I'll just read it. It says, only the cannabis cultivation, production, processing, research, or testing uses of a singular cannabis licensee holder may occur on a single lot. Right, so that wouldn't preclude somebody from renting a lot from a lot owner, getting a license for that lot, and then operating their cannabis cultivation business, right? What would be an issue is if a second person leased another portion of that lot from that landowner and did something similar, right? So yeah, so this wouldn't preclude somebody from renting a property to operate their business. Yeah.
Okay. Jerry, do you have any questions? Rob, I have a question for you. On 349(1)(e), refers to notwithstanding section 3.1 of this zoning bylaw, an accessory structure on the lot containing cannabis cultivation, production, processing, research, or testing use shall be set back a minimum of 15 meters from the lot line. My question is, will the building get captured by the 300-meter arc? So if you're having to apply 300 meters because you're within of a sensitive land use, does that, obviously the crop is moved back 300 meters, but is the building also moved back 300 meters?
Yeah, if the structure is intended to be accessory to the cannabis cultivation use, and it's going to be, I think the secret there would be is, if it's going to be, say, drying cannabis or being used to store cannabis, then we would apply the 300-meter setback from any sensitive land use. If it's a shed to to park vehicles in, that we would apply the 50-meter setback in that context. Yeah.
Okay. So there'd be nothing within 300 meters of the sensitive land use.
Yeah. So nothing that's cannabis related, right? That's either a crop or a cannabis storage facility, a cannabis drying facility, anything that could produce a cannabis odor, right? That's what we're trying to prevent is are the issues related to the odor generated by the cannabis plant, right? So anything that's related to that plant is going to be subject to the 300-meter setback from the sensitive land use.
Okay. A second question, 349(1)D, which says outdoor storage on a lot containing a cannabis cultivation, production, processing, etc., is prohibited. So would that mean, so if you use a vehicle to assist you in harvesting, that vehicle is going to have to be stored in a building. You're not going to be able to just park that.
Yeah, I'm not sure we would see that. This is where I think we would have to apply, a sense of reasonableness, right? So we're talking about the storage of goods and materials, and not so much parking of vehicles. I think in this context, Mr. Chair, and we could maybe be more specific if you got the sense that maybe it would apply to other things. We could be more specific and say it's really about the storage of goods and materials on the site that need to be stored indoors. But if you've got a vehicle, you can park a vehicle outside. That's not untoward, right? So yeah.
And I just want to go back to my last question, the issue about licenses, 2 licenses. So if you have a cultivation license issued by Health Canada, and you're on a piece of property, you cannot grow cannabis indoors elsewhere on that lot, correct?
Yeah, I'm not. So that would be a matter for the federal licensing regime to dictate, right? So what we're saying is, in that particular provision, is if the license, whatever the license allows that license holder to do, that's subject to the provisions of their agreement with the federal government. What we're saying is you can't then have a second license. A second license holder, right, operate on that same property. So it's going to be one license holder, right, to operate on a single lot.
So you either have a license to do outdoor cultivation, or you have a license for indoor cultivation. You don't have you can't be using the same lot for both, right?
I'd have to look into whether or not the federal government would issue a license that would allow a license holder to do both of those activities. Yeah.
Okay, so that's a reasonable inquiry to get back on, because what you're trying to avoid is that somebody would be holding 2 licenses on the same property, right? So that you're growing outdoors and you're growing indoors, and unless there's a license issue that allows for both, a single license that allows for both, you wouldn't be able to do it. But anyways, you're going to look into that and let us know what the scenario is. So, Rob, I take it it'd be okay if as we head over the next 4 weeks to the meeting, that if council thinks of some additional questions or ideas, that you'd be happy to entertain those as we move forward. I would guess, right?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Okay. So, yes, Anita.
I'll move that recommendation.
Mr. Chair, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. That's Gary. Donna? You
I was
wanna-
going to second it.
Okay, well, whilst on mute, I recognized you seconding that.
Okay.
But you wouldn't know that because I was foolish enough not to turn my mic on. So there we go. We have a mover and a seconder. We're going to try this again, this time with my voice actually being heard. We have a mover, a seconder to the motion. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that's carried. Very good. Okay, we'll try to get this right. Yes. Okay, then we're on to item 4B, which is you again, Rob. This is on the PHED lease. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so council will recall at last meeting, they did receive a report related to that PHEV vehicle. The report summarized our experience to date with the use of that vehicle and its impact on the savings that we've realized related to fuel and the impact that we've had on our carbon footprint. And the recommendation had been that we buy out the lease and carry on using the vehicle. And I committed at that meeting to provide council with some additional information related to capital costs. And I thank you for allowing me to do that. This report essentially outlines essentially what the vehicle was valued at when we first executed the lease with the dealership. So it's roughly a $43,500 vehicle. In the course of the 12 months lease, we will have paid down that lease to $28,000. So, and in my opinion, based on the fact that it's a really low mileage vehicle, we've bought the price of the vehicle to a point where it's certainly considerably below its current market value, in my opinion. So I note in the report that we've built that equity essentially by virtue of obtaining, or 80% of that equity was obtained by through a grant that we were lucky enough to get from FCM Green Municipal Fund. So essentially we've got currently we've got the use of a vehicle that does absolutely meet our needs and will for some time. We're charging it using a charger that also was paid for largely through the FCM grant. So we would, if we were to keep the vehicle, we would carry on, obviously taking advantage of that infrastructure. And so I think I guess in short, I could summarize by saying, look, to purchase it would be excellent value for dollar. And we would continue to benefit from the lower operating costs, obviously the continued use of infrastructure that we have in place, and would avoid the additional work that we would have to undertake to buy a replacement vehicle. So I'm asking council to allow us to go ahead and come to terms and purchase the vehicle outright at the end of the lease in essentially August 1st.
See Donna, Gary,
Yes.
and then Anita. Donna, Gary, and Anita.
Through you to Rob. In your report the last time, did you indicate that we had to get a new charging station? I seem to recall that, but I could be dreaming.
No. The station that's here today is adequate for our needs, for sure.
So for a couple of reasons, I think that it is a good idea that you interceded the last time because of the equity that we have in this vehicle and the difficulty in obtaining replacement vehicles as well, and probably at a greater cost because they are so scarce. So thank you for providing this extra information.
Thank you, Donna. Gary?
Thank you through you to Rob, and I guess to you, Mr. Mayor. So last time this came before us, you wanted to go ahead with that. Council was a little, the balance of council was a little bit resistance, but there was also a history there where when this first came to council, we did not have an appetite for it. Thus, I think the hesitation, and I may be speaking out of turn, but I know for me, it's the hesitation of, the past. I'm glad Rob did interject in there. However, I still think it is a little gimmicky. I'm disappointed in the cost savings, and I still don't believe it's the most practical vehicle. However, having bought 3 vehicles in the last 4 months, your budget allocation of $35,000 is right out to lunch. And the fact that we've paid down so much, I do believe it is in the best interest of the township financially to continue on here with option 1. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you for both parts of that. Anita?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I echo what Donna and Jerry have said. I know that Rob is, when Rob spoke at our last council meeting with regards to this, he was, he's very passionate, and I, have had a chance to think about it. And Rob is the one that drives the vehicle mostly, and if he feels that in terms of the usefulness of the vehicle, and also the fact that the vehicle has been paid down to what, 28,000 or something, or 31,000 with taxes or whatever. And I'm willing to move the recommendation.
Anita, and Donna will second it. Okay, further discussion? All in favor? Carried. Okay, that takes us to consent items. Who wants to pull a consent item? Anita? Oh, this is where we should, yes, okay. We need to deal with Anita's item separately, which is 6A3. So Anita, why don't you just turn off and not participate? So colleagues, the 3 of us will deal with 6A3. Is there any discussion on that? Would somebody like to move it? Jerry is moving it. Donna, will you second it? Okay, all in favor? Okay, 6A3 is carried, and that piece of business is disposed of. And so now we'll return to the balance of the consent agenda. So Anita, we've dealt with that without you present. And so are there any consent items we want pulled? Donna, what would you like pulled? And now you're muted.
Correspondence number 12 is all.
Number 12. And Anita, is there something you want pulled? No? Jerry, anything for you? Okay, and I would like to just talk briefly about 5B. So we only have 2 items then. We'll go in order, so I'll do 5B. I'm just curious, there's a dollar amount in that agreement. How many weeks does that translate into? Can somebody help me with that?
Sorry, Mr. Chair. We have to have spent the money by November of 2022. So it's not necessarily tied to weeks. It's a value.
Okay, so you could have somebody working 2 days a week for over a year. So okay, good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, that answers my question. Then Donna, you've got correspondence item number 12, which is the Township of Scugog.
Yes, so I would like council to consider supporting this resolution. I hadn't heard that the federal government is considering putting capital gains tax on primary residences. Previously, it was only secondary residences like cottages and so on. And that a lot of people have put a lot of money into their primary residences, and they plan to use them for retirement purposes. So I really have a problem with the government initiating that tax. So if council would support that, I think I would greatly appreciate it.
So Donna's gonna move that. Will somebody second it for her? Anita will second it for her. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Carried. Okay. And then we need a motion to accept the rest of the consent agenda. From Anita, seconded by Donna. All those in favor? That is carried. So that takes us, colleagues, to no petitions to our portfolios. And so, Donna, let you go first.
I'm not muted, right? Can you hear me?
Yes, again.
Okay. So first of all, the link, I got a fairly good report this time. Ridership from June the 14th to the 18th on Route 31 had a total of 65 riders. Route 32, a total of 12 riders. And this was an increase from the prior week and the highest ridership yet. So that's good news. We had our library board meeting this afternoon, and we've got a number of subcommittees going. One to analyze calls for action, another one for fundraising and organizing a silent auction, which will be virtual and in the fall. And if anybody has any new or gently used items to contribute to that silent auction, they can be dropped off at any library in July. So that would be greatly appreciated. And the libraries are hoping to open at 25% capacity by July the 5th. We had a recreation committee meeting a couple of weeks ago, which Jerry and I did not attend because they were creating their presentation on the use of the campground, and we didn't feel that we wanted to interfere with that. And our next police services board meeting won't be until late July. That's all for me.
Thank you very much. Jerry?
Thank you. Through you. The fields are open for practice for 10 people or less. Sorry, I'm just reading it off my notes here that Mr. Richardson texted me. And the marina is open for transients. And the campground is also open for transients, and they're working on getting ready for step 2. Public Works guys are out there staying hydrated, doing the ditches and preparing roads for tar and chip. And then they were contracted out the guys to do the crack sealing as well. So that's moving along well. That's it for me.
Thank you, Jerry. Anita?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we have an accessibility advisory committee meeting and a municipal heritage committee meeting tomorrow and Thursday. So I have nothing to report for that. I see that Green Up is having they're calling it the first DPAVE project in Lakefield, Unleash the Earth. It's at the Winfield Shores Harbor on Stewart Drive. It's on July 7th and 8th. Rain date is July 9th. Green Up will be depaving and planting a beautiful 100 square meter pocket park at the entrance to Winfield Shores Harbor on Stewart Drive. And they say, together we will liberate the soil, make Winfield Shores rain ready, and add beauty and biodiversity for the whole community to enjoy. Volunteer spaces are limited, and all volunteers must pre-register for the event. You can find more information on the Green Up website at www.greenup.on.ca/dpaveparadise. So that's kind of exciting. Also, June is Seniors Month, so through the Greater Peterborough Chamber of Commerce, and I believe the Kawartha Chamber as well, they have their seniors showcase. It's virtual. They have videos, a variety of workshops via videos, and that can be found through the peterboroughchamber.ca seniors showcase. And like I said, I believe that Kawartha Chamber also is advertising for the senior showcase. And that's it for me.
Thank you very much. I'll just provide a report as well. So since our last council meeting, we had a joint services meeting with the city. There's really active discussion on the housing portfolio. As you probably are aware, the city is changing the way it wants to deal with affordable housing and its impact on social housing. How that is going to impact the county and the lower tier townships is an active discussion. We work through that. We have both social housing and affordable housing that is owned by Peterborough Public Housing in our township. And so we're watching that evolve very closely. On the public health side, a great progress on vaccines, and they changed the timing. So you'll see they'll issue an update tomorrow about 4:30 on exactly where we stand locally. But we're doing quite well. We're awaiting, as Jerry alluded to, when step 2 will be in. It's scheduled for July 2nd right now, or it's scheduled in the sense that the initial plan said there had to be 21 days between step 1 and step 2. Well, that will be 21 days. In terms of vaccine targets that were set with those steps, we've already achieved the step 2 target. So it's running down the 21 days. Step 1 is in place, and there's some additional uses that are allowed. Public health makes the point. There may be more things that you can do, but when you do them, you need to continue to do them safely. So that's important. I mentioned that at the annual general meeting of Alpha is to public health what AMO is to municipalities. I was elected to the board, the provincial board of Alpha. On the county side, the county is going through 4 really key processes, and I alluded to this, I think, in my last report, that are going to have an impact on Selwyn in terms of the future. So we all are well aware, and we've talked about the official plan needs to be done and is in the process. As part of that official plan, though, is the growth allocation. So the province has assigned a notional growth amount to the county, and there's a consultant going through trying to determine where will that growth get allocated amongst the 8 lower tier municipalities. So that's an important project. We are at the same time doing a new development charge bylaw, which is many of the projects that are growth related will be in part funded through development charges. And we're also going through our transportation master plan. And in fact, in the next little while, we're going to be looking at specific intersections, some of which are in Selwyn, and some of those that are more problematic than others. The county is looking very carefully at the causeway in terms of short-term needs to keep that roadbed in a passable shape over the next several months before they go back and do the actual rebuild of the roadway. So they're very cognizant of that. There are meetings this week taking place to look at how they're going to do that. And I think I mentioned the last time, the province issued regulations regarding the user pay system for the blue box. So there's going to be a change in the way the blue boxes are handled, or the blue box material is handled. Is now going to go to a user pay system. So basically, people who produce the items that get recycled will end up having to bear the cost. But it makes a number of changes in the way that will be applied. That's still a couple of years down the road before that comes into effect. Orca we're working through the new regulations, but I wanted to mention, and most of you are probably aware, and to congratulate one of our area MPPs, the Honorable David Piccini now, who is now the minister responsible for the environment and parks. And he, in part of that portfolio, is responsible for conservation authorities. So that was an appointment last Friday, so congratulations to him. This past Saturday, the Lake Alliance meeting was held. This is a number of cottage groups and road associations that come together under the Lake Alliance. And we had a really good 2-hour discussion. Rosanna spoke to them about public health. The warden spoke on behalf of the county, and Carl and I spoke on behalf of our 2 townships, and went over a number of topics with them. Low water response team met. We are in a level 1 low water response, and we're meeting again on July the 6th to see whether we go to level 2. And we have, from my perspective, fortunately seen some moisture over the last week. So, but the amount seems to be very regional. There are places that got really inundated, and there are other places that have seen hardly anything. So we'll have to see when we get the report on that. And I had an opportunity to participate with MPP Smith on his food drive, not this past Saturday, but the Saturday before in Buckhorn. And he's got another, he's doing this Saturday at Giant Tiger in Selwyn. So that's my report. And we will then go on to other new or unfinished business. And there is an item there, and I don't know who's going to speak to that. Is that Angie? Are you going to speak to that request for exemption?
I certainly can. Yes, essentially what we're looking for is an exemption to conduct our annual exercise. We still remain activated in an emergency. So we'd like to be able to demonstrate to the province that we've been responding to COVID. We're not the only municipality. So we're looking for council's support to ask the province to waive that requirement.
Okay, yes, Anita, you want to move that? And Jerry will second it. Any discussion? All those in favor? Carried. Okay. Is there any other new or unfinished business, Jerry?
Thank you. Through you, I just wanted to follow up on your report, Mr. Mayor, regarding the causeway and the bed. When you say they're going to look into it, like we're talking next week, they might fix that thing, because that is an absolute disgrace. And the way they have left that, the guy must be the guy who signed off on Selwyn Road, signed off on that. That is horrendous, my friend. I mean, horrendous, and they ought to be embarrassed.
And I have conveyed words very similar to that, and I will add your words to it, along with many, many, many residents. Donna.
Yes, I just have a question related to your portfolio. I guess I should have asked earlier, but people are confused about something that was on the news this morning about the Pfizer vaccine. Is it not going to be delivered this week or next, and people that are scheduled will be switched to Moderna? Do you know about that?
There was a press release issued this morning, I think, from Public Health, saying that they will that their clinics this week, their mass vaccination clinics, may have either Moderna or Pfizer in them, and that you'll be administered whatever is in that particular clinic. They are interchanging. So if you had Pfizer in the first one, they're saying you can have Moderna in the second. You had Moderna in the first one, that you could have Pfizer in the second. So that's the recommendation that is out there. We are doing a press conference on Thursday, and Rosanna will speak more directly to it. So there were big shipments, I believe, of Moderna this week that have come in. I think that Pfizer is there's a slight delay on some of the Pfizer coming in, but rather than, I would want to check and make absolutely certain, and I'll get back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think then we have two bylaws. This comes from a motion from the previous meeting, which is to formally appoint Tom McAllister to the Heritage Committee and to remove Dave Kavanaugh from the Economic Development and Business Committee. And then we have a bylaw to authorize that Parks Canada contribution. So can I have a motion for both of those? From Anita, seconded by Donna. All those in favor? Carried. Okay, a confirming bylaw. Donna, seconded by Jerry. All those in favor. And adjournment, moved by Jerry, seconded by Anita. All those in favor. Colleagues, thank you very much. We got through a lot of business and we did it efficiently. So thank you. Have a good evening, and we will talk to you soon. Bye-bye. And thanks to all the staff too. Thank you.